Okay, we are on to our next group, which is phylum Annelida. So this is our third group of worms. So hopefully you printed off the notes on phylum Nematoda and have read through that, and we can highlight and emphasize some stuff in class tomorrow, but make sure you read through it. So at this point, we are now through 5 different phyla, if you can remember. So see if you can write those down so what's the name for sponges? What's the name for things like jellyfish and sea anemones? And then we've got 3 groups of worms, right? So we have the scientific name for the flatworms, then we have the roundworms, and now we're on to phylum Annelida, which is our 5th phylum of invertebrates. And these are basically segmented worms. All right. And so if you think about the classification, so again, just practice and review. We are in domain Euchera, which we are for every single animal. We are in kingdom Animalia. Again, same kingdom for every single animal. But at this point now we're in phylum Annelida. So this represents segmented worms. So 3 classes of annelids include what are called oligochaeta. All right. And now this word chaeta, so again, these are classes, right? And this chaeta refers to their bristles, which again, I could show you some images to sort of see how those are different. Now, I made a mistake here. This is supposed to be um, earthworms here. So earthworms are up here. So if you scratch that out, so they're named for very few. So oligo means few bristles, or setae, these chaetae, on their segments. And then we've got, oh, sorry, I should say these are free living worms for the most part. So remember, they kind of live in soil and aquatic environments. Then we've got polychaeta. Polychaeta. So these have many bristles, having up to as many as 20 setae. So they're like tiny, really rigid little hairs that they have on their ventral side, so their belly side. You're going to see they're in part for anchoring and movement. And so these are also free living. And then we have a group which doesn't sound at all like the others, but Heridnia. But you'll be familiar with these. These are leeches, nice. An annelid, which is specialized for parasitic blood sucking. Sounds great, eh? Parasitic blood sucking. So those are the 3 classes: oligochaeta, polychaeta, and Heridnia. And I'll just pause this just for a second and show you a video. So this is sort of the animated version of the picture, right? So you can see leeches here. They tend to lack those bristles, but again, they're all segmented, right? We can see these sort of segments of each group. Polychaeta, so we can see lots of these little bristles. Oligochaeta, just a few. Heridnia lack. Of course, it's not a great picture until you can sort of see an actual, see what one of these things look like in the real world. I'm just trying to find a good one. I guess any of these work, right? So you can see lots of these tiny little bristles, these setae. Most of these polychaeta are marine-like, right? And then you've got something like oligochaeta, like the earthworm. And in fact, with most earthworms, you don't even see. So if we were to just look at a setae of an earthworm, you wouldn't even really see the bristles. They're very hard to see, but here's sort of the cartoon-like picture. You can see these bristles on the underside. We'll talk about how they use those for movement. Okay, so yeah, they're basically classed based on those types of that they have on the underside. So general characteristics, they are bilaterally symmetrical. I think I have the wrong sheet here. There we go. They are bilaterally symmetrical, like all worms. They have 3 germ layers. So this is the first group that we're going to see all three germ layers. They have the tube within a tube body plan, so that means that they've got organs. They have a true coelom. This is the first invertebrate that we've seen with that body cavity. So it has a complete body cavity that's lined by mesoderm, so this gives rise to these internal organs and a very much greater specification of body parts, right? So these body parts with very specific purposes and functions. We're going to see the development of a circulatory system. Oh, wow, hearts and blood vessels. Not much for respiratory. These things don't have lungs, but all right, so movement. Well, bilateral symmetry. And because so many of them are free living, that they have to have means of getting around their environment. So they have both circular and longitudinal muscles. And if you think longitudinal, if you think about ever watching an earthworm move, how they can both constrict, elongate, right? But they can twist side to side with these longitudinal muscles. Contraction of the circular muscles increases the pressure of like their body fluid, the coelomic fluid, which elongates the animal, pushing the anterior forward, right? So, if you've ever sort of seen an earthworm get skinny as it moves, so these contraction of those circular muscles increases the pressure and extends the body out forward, but those bristles on the bottom are kind of anchoring as the one end sort of pushes forward. So the setae anchor the middle segments of the body as the longitudinal muscles contract, pulling the posterior segments forward. So their segmentation makes this type of movement possible. So improved movement for the first time. And again, we're seeing more free living, right? Versus the other tapeworms, the flatworms, and the nematodes, mostly parasitic. Don't really need a means of moving when you're within a host, right? Now, digestive system is fairly elaborate. So we're going to start to see the development of specialized organs all throughout. In the earthworm, food enters the mouth, and then it goes into the esophagus, just like us. So here you can sort of see the mouth, right? And food enters through here. They have a pharynx at the back, which kind of maybe makes up. So you don't see quite the distinguishing organs that you do in us. So you have this next section is the esophagus here, right? And then what you'll see is a couple of bulges in the digestive tract. The first bulge is the crop. So from the esophagus, from the pharynx, it moves through the crop. Hang on, where do I want to go here? Yeah, moves through the esophagus. Sorry, I think I wanted to say. Yeah, from the pharynx, yeah. Moves through the esophagus to the crop where it is stored. So this first section is just kind of storing food, right? And then it passes into the gizzard. So that's the next sort of bulge you see in the digestive tract where muscles mechanically break it down. When you do a dissection, you can feel this region is really firm and kind of rigid, whereas this is a little bit more soft and squishy because it's flexible as it holds food. And then this is more muscular and rigid as it helps to grind and break the food down mechanically, as well, of course, enzymes. Food then enters the intestine. And if you ever look at a worm, basically most of this is in the first third or even less, first quarter of the worm. And then the rest of the length is basically all intestines. And the intestines have sections which are referred to as typhlosoles, which are folds. Typhlosole. Which is a fold in the intestine, which increases surface area to maximize absorption, right? And then, of course, undigested waste exits through the anus. So the first thing to really start to see not just the digestive system, but specialization. So different organs from the mouth, the pharynx, the esophagus, crop, gizzard, and then intestines, right? So very elaborate digestive system. But you can see there's lots of other organs here we can look at, which we'll see down below. Circulatory system, so that's outlined in red here. So you can see these little 5 arches that connect 2 different blood vessels. So there's a blood vessel going down the back side, the dorsal, and one going down the front side or the belly side or the ventral. So we say it has a closed circulatory system because blood is traveling within vessels and it's connected. It doesn't pool outside the body, which we'll see in some invertebrates. So it has a closed circulatory system consisting of a dorsal and ventral blood vessel, as well as 5 pairs of branches, or what we call pseudohearts. So that's these right here, right? It's got these pairs of pseudohearts which pump the blood toward the back of the worm, towards the back of the worm, through the ventral blood vessel, and then returns through the dorsal blood vessel back to the hearts. So due to the pulsating action of the branches, which is similar to the action of hearts, they're termed hearts or pseudohearts. They're not in any way like our hearts, which are quite a bit more complex, dealing with different systems of circulation. But we've got circulation, which we didn't see in any other invertebrates up to this point. They have an excretory system, so it's very small. Well, it's not small, but there's these very small little organs called nephridia, or one being nephridium, and you'll find them in every segment all the way down the worm, all the way down the intestines. So remember that annelids are segmented, and so in each one of those segments they have nephridia. And so these are basically dealing with metabolic waste that's coming out of the blood, right? So it's not coming out of the digestive system. So in earthworms, a pair of nephridia in each segment. In each segment, filter the blood and excrete nitrogenous waste. So you can think of it as like metabolic waste. This is kind of what this is akin to our own kidneys, right? Blood circulates through our kidneys, and our kidneys are working to form our urine through the removal of metabolic waste that's in our blood. Our blood is traveling all over our body through each tissue, whether it's our liver, our small intestine, or our muscles of our leg, or our big toe, wherever. Blood is traveling through those tissues and it's collecting up the waste from all of those tissues. And then, of course, it circulates to our kidneys, in which it pulls the waste out. In the earthworm, these nephridia extract those nitrogenous wastes and they dump them out into the environment through what's called an excretory pore. All right. Now we get into the nervous system. We can see continued development here. So they don't have very many specialized sense organs, but they do have a chain of ganglia. And so again, this is kind of that cephalization, right? So it's connected by a ventral nerve cord. So they have, and I'll show in the picture here, well, maybe it's more visible up here. So if I erase some of this stuff, what we'll see is this really light blue. So you can see the ventral nerve cord. So that's this light blue that's kind of just traveling down all the way. And again, if you move, then you have to have a nervous system that coordinates those muscles to move, right? So remember, there's circular muscles in each segment and then longitudinal muscles. So hence the ventral nerve cord that stimulates the contraction of those muscles and allows movement to take place. So in most anterior segments, there are several ganglia which are fused together to form cerebral ganglia, or what we might know as a very simple brain, right? And again, we'll go back to that word, very important word, cephalization, right? This is that concentration of nerve tissue at the anterior end, right? So if I highlight this here, I don't know if that's going to work. My highlight's not working. There it is. Okay, very important word. Make sure you remember that. And that's part of its nervous system as well. Reproductive, so they are hermaphrodites, right? Hermaphrodites. Okay, but individual worm cannot fertilize itself. During copulation, they are held together by their setae, so they not only are involved in movement, but also in reproduction. And they produce a very thick mucus secreted by that clitellum. So when you look at an earthworm and you see that sort of classic bulge, do I have that picture back? Let's see. Yeah, so you can see here the image of the clitellum. I was trying to find a more realistic picture here. There's one right here, right? So you can see right here that sort of bulge. So this clitellum acts to secrete mucus, in which it's where fertilization takes place. Oops. Okay. And then sometime after copulation, long after the worms have separated, the clitellum behind the spermatocyte secretes a tube made of chitin. Remember that? And that's going to form a ring around the worm. The worm then backs out of the ring, and as it does so, it injects its own eggs and other worms' sperm into it. And as the worm slips out of the ring, the ends of the cocoon seal. And I could show you a video of this tomorrow in class, but it looks pretty interesting when we look and see how that whole process takes place, and you get this cocoon of which the egg develops inside and the little worm grows. Ecology, well, massive roles ecologically, including, of course, they are decomposers, right? So they break down organic matter in the soil, right? They also aerate the soil. So this allows passage of gas, oxygen and nitrogen within soil. And I'll stop there because I don't want to go on too long. This is the last one, and then we'll catch up tomorrow in class.